Lots of stuff happening there.
There is a lot of stuff happening in this one.
I did see somebody in the comments. They were asking. We were talking about the teraphim. They said it had to have been small. Excuse me, because she was sitting on it, and she was on camels. And if you look at camels today, they have two humps. A camel saddlebag would go between the two humps. So literally, all she would have to do was stuff it between the two humps while she was sitting on top of it, and she could hide. I mean, anything, pretty decent size. So
it didn't have to be small. Yeah.
And she couldn't get off, right? Because she was telling her dad she's having her period. So, leave me alone. I'm up here.
Yeah.
But she understood what he could do with that. There was obviously some power with that. I mean, we see in stories of Abraham where, Abraham kind of makes fun of his dad Terah's idols by, letting them, smash each other and all this other kind of stuff. But there was something about whatever he was using that she took because she feared he was going to use it to divine their location. That's where the fear was at. She didn't take it because she wanted to keep the idols or anything like that. And that's the only thing he was mad about. He realized he couldn't do anything else, but she took my idols, she took my divining tool. And, it's interesting because we see that same teraphim ideology all the way into the Templar mythology where they, everybody gets this idea of a Baphomet with this goat head, but it was actually, when you read the lore around they had John the Baptist's head and they were using it to divine information and knowledge. So this teraphim idea, it permeates the occult throughout the Bible. And I think we even see some of this kind of stuff in Ezekiel and other things but it's mainly described here in Rachel. Or with the story of Rachel.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know about the John the Baptist head. I know the Gospels say that his disciples came and buried his body, but obviously they didn't have the head, right? So, interesting. Yeah. What I find really weird, I mean, I know it might not be weird to someone like Laban because he's so entrenched in his culture and his belief system, but the fact that he has this dream and God comes to him in the dream and says, "Don't say anything either good or bad to Jacob," right? And that seems like an ambiguous statement, right? Because he goes off on him. He says, like, "You've taken this and you've done that, blah, blah, blah." But I just find it fascinating that, like, he's upset that his gods have been taken. Yet the God of all gods came to him in a dream and was just like, don't say anything to him. Like, he warned him, right? You don't see Laban's reaction. He didn't freak out to that and be like, "Oh my goodness." Like, okay, like, you're on Jacob's side here, clearly. You're for him doing what he's doing. So I always get interested with the responses that these people have when the Lord shows up and they still continue in their blatant paganism.
Yeah. Well, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream from God as well, and he still consulted all of his prophets and priests for all of his gods and deities. And then even when he got the vision for the dream, he's like, "Hey, your God's a cool dude. Cool. I know how to fix this. I'm just going to build an entire gold statue." Yeah. So yeah, when you have that pantheistic ideology of gods, then, even though you see the actions of this God or, the God of all gods, the only God, you're like, yeah, well, I have all my other gods too, so it was a real thing for them back then. And some of those, those powers and principalities had and did do things for people. It was, when the God of all gods comes, though, he's the one that usually defines himself from the others. And he says, "Hey, I don't do these things," or "I'm going to tell you the truth and it's going to come to pass," while these other gods are lying and stuff. So,
well, isn't that what Raul or Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, priest of Midian, isn't that what he says in Exodus 18 when he shows up and he's like, "I heard about everything that your God has done for you," and he's like, "And now I realize that your God is the one true God." Right. And it's like they had to be convinced of this because they did see so much spiritual activity through the false gods. With lying signs and wonders of various types, and so, even here, someone like Laban, I don't know exactly the capabilities of teraphim or if that was just an offshoot of his regular occultic practices, going to other types of idols and temples and seeing, magical concepts or spiritual things happening at pagan temples. But clearly he, like you said, Ken, he's definitely heeds the warning. He doesn't strike Jacob. He doesn't take him. Jacob was right in his fear of Laban. He tells Laban, "Hey, I was afraid you're going to take my daughters by force." Well, what does Laban shout at him like three minutes later? these daughters are mine, these sons are mine, these livestock is mine. And you're like, whoa, dude, you're the granddad. None of this is yours. Like, this is my family. But that's not Laban's mindset. And I think God knew that as well, which is why he had to give him that warning to not do anything to Jacob. So yeah, Laban is a character, man. He's a guy that he's just your ultimate bad employer and very, very toxic family member,
Can we talk about how Jacob burns bridges everywhere he goes?
Right.
Everywhere he goes, he's making somebody mad.
Yeah, it's wild. And what's really interesting, especially if you understand who's standing there listening to this guy, and just like, I mean, we've got Judah, Reuben, Simeon. I think Laban would have lost that encounter, to be honest. To be honest with you, we got Simeon's like 20 years old at this point. He would have probably taken out all of Laban's men by himself. So I that's the kind of like that backdrop that you don't get talked about, in this story, is that it looks like Jacob's at a disadvantage, but God's on his side. Oh, and by the way, he's got all these extremely powerful sons that are just sitting there watching and listening. Just fingers itching, just sitting there, just being like, "What are we about to do, Dad? We don't like this."
Say the word.
Yeah, say the word. We'll destroy everything. So, it's very interesting little tense drama moment that the father brings Jacob through. He causes there to be peace, which I think is cool. And it's interesting that they set up this boundary line that neither one should cross each other for harm. And I think that's interesting. That seems to be the way that Laban kind of spoke during that covenant process of setting up this boundary stone. It's like, bro, why are you talking like this? You don't have anything to fear from Jacob. Like, he's the one running from you because of your bad behavior. Why are you trying to act like you're a potential victim in this? You know what I mean? It's just like that whole mindset of Laban just not being an upright character, Yeah.
I do like that they follow covenant process though, where there's an altar, they swear on the altar over, before God, and then they have the meal. There's always the meal that comes with covenant. So
yeah, that's great. All right. What else was in this? Let me go to the summary real quick, and then we can get to Ezekiel. So this here, those of you reading along at home, guys, this is just at the end of the 6 years. Laban and his sons become envious of Jacob's livestock success, and they begin to despise him. That's unfortunate because they could have all been a nice big family, but covetousness comes in. Yahweh told Jacob to return to live with Isaac and Rebekah. He actually does it this time. Jacob confronts Laban over his dishonest behavior with the wages Jacob had earned. Jacob packs up the family and possessions and leaves Laban's household, but doesn't realize Rachel secretly took her father's teraphim with him. Laban discovered his missing idols and chases down Jacob's caravan to retrieve them. He searches Jacob's belongings in tents, but doesn't find them because Rachel was sitting on them. Jacob makes a covenant with Laban, sets up a stone pillar at Galith, also called Mitzpah, that neither of them will cross that boundary to harm one another.
I think like this just shows how righteous of a man Jacob is. I mean, all the things he says, like you've changed my wages 10 times, you've deceived me here, you've done that, and blah blah. Like that, any other man, you know what I mean? Like, who would put up with that? And he shows he's got the long suffering, he's got the heart of a righteous person, of a priest, pruning his way into the priesthood and trusting in the Father the whole way through, right? So it's amazing to see. And I wanted to say, Sean, these summaries are great. These are really cool. These are really good. Yeah,
the attitude. Okay, so I'm putting myself in Jacob's mindset, and I'm thinking because I agree with you, Ken. Like, he's being extremely patient with Laban, right? Why? He comes from an extremely powerful family. His father's high priest of the entire region down below in the south, and I mean, that with that comes rulership and power. Like, Jacob's not a nobody here, right? He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to be subjected to this nonsense. But he's being extremely patient. I thought to myself, well, maybe it's because of the daughters, right? He married Laban's daughters. He's got the wives, and he's trying to make them happy as well. That's their father. He doesn't want to, be despised in his wife's eyes. Maybe he's trying to put up with their father so that he can create peace with his two wives, since apparently the two wives are already at enmity with each other. So he's got a lot he's dealing with, right? Yeah. At the same time, then I thought to myself, no, because his daughters even pick up on the fact that their dad's not very cool. Right. Yeah. They even say this at one point, like, our dad, he sold us and then he squandered what he paid for us. All of his possessions have eventually become ours. Like, our dad's, it's a weird conversation to see them having, because it's almost as if they knew that this point of confrontation was going to happen as well when Jacob decided he needed to go back to Isaac, because the daughters are sitting there going, well, there's no reason for us to stay with their dad. Why would you even think about staying with your dad? You're married to Jacob. You're one flesh with Jacob now. You should be wherever Jacob's going to go, you're going to go anyway, right? Why would you
Mhm.
even consider? Why would you even have this conversation between the two of them? That, well, who's a better source of income and provision? You know what I'm saying? Like Laban or Jacob? You know, it's like, so it's almost as if Laban's obsession, or Laban's attitude, his bad attitude, is something that was picked up by his daughters as well. And Jacob's having to deal with an entirely different family raised in a different culture compared to what he was raised in, and he's just trying to do the best he can to get out of there without bloodshed. Is basically the way I see it.
Well, I think this is a good example too. Like, a lot of us find ourselves surrounded by people who may have worldly, human, secular, mentalities, pagan, cultures, that kind of stuff. He didn't flee from it, right? He worked, and again, he worked for 14 years to get both of his wives, and then he was there for another 6, because it says he worked there for 20 years. So he was still continuing to do so because it was all in God's timing, right? Because God was keeping him there from Esau's anger. And then when he goes back, he finds out that everything works out, in the end, right? But he was keeping them there for that period of time for a specific reason. So you have to really, if you're obedient to the Father, sometimes he puts you in weird situations under somebody you have to work under who's a pagan or whatever, but you have to, you have to trust in the Father, and you have to be obedient to the Father and where he's directing you. Now you've got, at the very end of this Torah passage here, you've got this guy who's also dealing with, he doesn't have his pagan idols anymore because somebody jacked him, and now he's doing an altar worship to the Father, so basically, I don't have my God, so we're going to worship to your God, kind of thing at the end. And I just think it's interesting, God works everything out for his glory and for our good. So
yeah, well said, Aaron.